The Way of the Warrior by Arthur Sanchez. Read by Arthur Sanchez. Copyright 2009. All rights reserved. You are not a true warrior, the demon lord declared as his face contorted into a menacing sneer, steam pouring from his ears. Shinso braced for the attack. Prepare to die, the demon lord shouted as he began stomping his feet. Shinso wiped the sweat from his palms on his black cotton pants before picking up the controller pad. He sat cross-legged, huddled directly in front of the tiny TV set he used as a screen. The image was a little fuzzy, and the sound was barely audible, but it was the most he dared. The walls of the dormitory cells were made of paper, and some of the older brothers would not have approved. A warrior does not fear his opponent, Shinso whispered. A warrior is true to his cause. A warrior accepts his destiny when it is revealed. Shinso took a deep breath to calm himself. On the TV screen, two figures were placed in the courtyard of a temple not unlike the one in which Shinso now served. The demon lord was a frightful monster with horns upon his head, ferocious eyes, and sharp dagger-like teeth. It was what a demon lord should look like. But Shinso, much to his disappointment, was nothing like the handsome, tall, and muscular image he was using. Shinso was small, scrawny, and as plain as rainwater, but when he played Way of the Warrior, he was a man to be reckoned with, a grand master. The music on the program signaled that the duel was about to begin. When it stopped, Shinso launched his attack. First, a waist-high kick, then 3 power blows to the face. The demon lord rocked on his feet as his failing life points flashed in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. But the demon lord wasn't about to be taken so easily. He roared like a lion and blocked Shinso's next series of punches with his massive arms. Shinso switched to a few roundhouse kicks, but the demon lord executed his karmic shield and prevented any further damage. The demon lord struck Shinso's avatar with a thunder punch that sent the figure sprawling in the opposite direction. Shinso began pounding on the buttons. Get up, get up, get up! The figure rose slowly as 50 points disappeared from his life meter. Shinso knew he needed to get in close to prevent the enemy from using any of his thunder features, so he executed his best move. He had his fighter duck a blow, drop and roll in close, and then double punch the demon lord's knees. That knocked the demon lord off his feet. Then Shinso had his avatar punch the demon lord repeatedly in the face. Boom! Shinso shouted. Take that! And that! And that! Shinso could see the demon lord's life points dropping rapidly. It was working. He was going to win. Shinso! Shinso froze at the voice of the Grand Master. Shinso! The voice called out again. Where are you? Shinso looked at the TV screen. The demon lord's life points were down by more than 50%. Shinso, do you hear me? Shinso groaned. He could not keep Grandmaster Koichiro Oichi waiting, but he was about to win the game. He'd be elevated to Grandmaster Second Class and would be given the secret password to the next level. Shinso, are you in your room? The sound of the Grandmaster's footsteps coming down the hallway echoed off the walls. That did it. Shinso pulled the plug on the game and watched the screen fade to black. Then, pushing the TV, controller, and game system under his bed so that they wouldn't be seen, he leapt to his feet and straightened his coarse brown smock. Sliding open the door to his cell and stepping quickly out into the hallway, Shinso came face to face with the Grand Master. It is perhaps one of the ironies of the universe that the Grand Master of the Temple of Eternal Light looked nothing like a warrior. He was short, barely as tall as Shinso, bald, 52 years old, and bow-legged. He wore a coarse dark gray smock and pants that were more akin to a mechanic's work clothes than to his robes of state, and he preferred to go about barefooted. But it would be a mistake to disregard him. The Grand Master is an expert in 36 forms of armed and unarmed combat. He is the ultimate warrior. There you are, the older man declared. Didn't you hear me calling you? Shinso bowed his head respectfully. Yes, Master, I did, but I was... Shinso did not want to lie. I was contemplating the Way of the Warrior. It was not a lie. The game was called Way of the Warrior 4, but that was probably more information than was necessary at the moment. The Grand Master cocked a bushy eyebrow. Really? Shinso stared at the floor. Yes, Master. Then what is the 5th law of the warrior? He demanded. To be ever vigilant, Shinso said in what he hoped was a dutiful tone. The Grand Master nodded his head. Correct. And though you may have been in deep contemplation, your duty is to answer me when I call. How vigilant can you be if you don't even hear me shouting? I doubt a demon would be so polite as to announce himself before attacking. Shinso looked up to see the Grand Master's annoyed expression and gulped. Forgive me, Master. It will not happen again. He bowed deeply in remorse. The Grand Master stared at him a moment before bowing his head in acceptance. Then, in a voice that was far gentler than Shinso deserved, said, Come with me. There is work to be done. The Grand Master turned and walked back down the corridor. Shinso took a deep breath. He was going to have to be more careful. Once out in the main courtyard, Shinso felt his mood lighten. Nestled unobtrusively in the foothills of Mount Fuji, the ancient and beautiful Temple of Eternal Light has existed for almost 700 years. It was built on the remains of an even older temple, which had been built on the remains of a temple, and so on for time immemorial. Countless generations have stood watch on this spot, waiting for him. The Grand Master had crossed the open courtyard and was standing beneath the cherry trees. Shinso loved those trees. He remembered the night he arrived at the temple. He had climbed the outer wall seeking sanctuary, and, though it was the dead of winter, found that the trees were in bloom. It didn't take a scientist to figure out that wasn't right. It was his first hint that this was no ordinary temple. The monks were kind enough when they found him. They fed him, clothed him, and allowed him to pray with them, but they wouldn't tell him anything about themselves. Ordinarily, Shinso wouldn't have cared. A child of the streets, he was accustomed to secrets, but in that temple, Shinso found peace. It was as if he'd always been looking for this place, and it only took a few short weeks for him to decide that he wanted to join the order. That's when the monks were forced to tell him the truth. "Shinso," the Grand Master said in response to his request, "before you can join us, there are a few things you must understand." Shinso didn't think before asking. "Such as?" The Grand Master sat down in his usual place at the dining table. All the brothers were there. "That demons are real, and that they are coming to destroy us." Shinso blinked. "What?" "The when of this invasion is unknown, but the place where this army of monsters will invade our world lies within the confines of this monastery. Shinso, our order does not exist for simple prayer and meditation. We are here to prepare for the ultimate conflict." He said it so honestly that Shinso forgot to laugh. "You're kidding, right?" "Earth," the Grand Master continued, "lies at the crossroads of multiple dimensions. The others are populated by demons determined to destroy us. But there are rules to the universe. The demons cannot enter our world any time they wish. First they must send a champion who will fight to open the gate. Our mission," the Grand Master said as he poured some tea, "is to keep him from succeeding." Shinso remembered looking around at the open and honest faces of the brothers. They were all watching him, and strange as it sounded, he knew they were telling the truth. "Shouldn't the government be handling this?" "The rules are inviolable. One champion for each side. Winner takes all. That is why we train. That is why we meditate. It is our task. For as long as anyone can remember, we have prepared. And when the time comes, we will be ready." "But how will you know when it's time?" The Grand Master smiled. "The trees will tell us. The cherry trees are a symbol of our eternal vigilance. They are always in bloom, but on the day of the challenge, the blossoms will fall to alert us of the coming conflict. That is the agreement. That is the promise." Shinso never did find out who made them that promise. "Brother," Shinso was suddenly back in the present, "are you all right?" The Grand Master was looking at him with concern. Shinso shook off his memories. "Yes, Master, I was just thinking." He crossed the courtyard to where the Grand Master stood. The Grand Master nodded his head. "It is a good day for thinking, for today is a very important day." Shinso's heart suddenly began to beat more rapidly. Could it be? Was he about to be elevated to the next level of training? "Today," the Grand Master said as they surveyed the trees, "is the summer solstice." He turned to find Shinso frowning with confusion. "It is a day of renewal," he explained. Shinso still looked confused. "With your brother monks all out conducting renewal ceremonies, a very important task has fallen to you." Shinso's hope rose again. "You have the honor of washing the floors." Shinso managed to keep his mouth shut, thereby avoiding a very embarrassing exclamation, but he was never good at keeping his face expressionless. His eyes popped as the veins in his neck bulged with indignation. This was a very important task. "You do not seem pleased. Why?" the Grand Master asked, aware of his reaction. Shinso groaned. He didn't want to say anything, but the Master had asked him a direct question. "I did not join the temple to do house cleaning. I joined so that I may be taught the ways of a warrior, so that I can defend against evil. I don't see how I can get anywhere if all I ever do is dust the shrines, wash the dishes, and mop the floors." Shinso hadn't meant to shout, but it came out that way. He immediately dropped to his knees in repentance. "Forgive me, I... The Grand Master's voice fell to almost a whisper. "Do you feel that your time is being wasted, Shinso? Do you feel that your talents are not being recognized?" Shinso began to panic. He'd gone too far. He was going to be sent away. "No, Master," he said as he looked up. "You have always been most kind. I did not sleep well last night, and I think—" The Master waved off Shinso's excuses. "I know your frustrations, brother. I, too, have stood—" The Grand Master paused for a second. "Well, kneeled, at least. where you kneel now." "You have?" The master nodded his head. "A true warrior is not made in an instant. He does not spring into being just because he has learned which end of a sword to hold. A true warrior is forged through time, from dedication and honor, from sacrifice and acceptance. We would not have allowed you to remain if we doubted that you had the makings of a true warrior. You are here because we believe in you." Shinzo could feel the blood rushing to his face. The master believed in him. "Now," the master said, returning to the task at hand, "do you think that washing these paths is too low a task for a true warrior?" He indicated the 3 paths that cut across the front courtyard, each separate and important in its own right. There was the pilgrim's path of granite slabs that led between the shrine and the great oaken gates of the outer wall. There was the path of vigilance to the right, consisting of fist-sized river stones that wove beneath the cherry trees. There was the path of meditation on their left, of smooth white quartz pebbles that led down a small hill into the rock garden and the misnamed Friendship Gate. Each path was as ancient as the temple. "Over 40 generations of our brothers have walked this way," the master continued, "and all of them dedicated their lives to the protection of our world. Would it truly be so low a thing to do if you had to wash the stones on which they stood?" Shinzo swallowed hard as shame threatened to overwhelm him. "No, it would be an honor." The master smiled, pleased with Shinzo's answer. "Good. You have taken another step in your journey towards becoming a true warrior. I will begin the shrine meditating. After lunch we will rededicate the paths and ourselves to our mighty task." Shinzo remained kneeling. "Yes, master." Shinzo was almost done mopping the path of vigilance when there was a loud knocking at the front gates. Shinzo jumped as the first resounding blows shattered the peaceful silence. The temple was far off the main roads, so nobody ever came here. Shinzo couldn't remember it ever happening before. 3 more loud knocks landed on the door. Shinzo was amazed. Their visitor was using the great bronze knockers. Those things weighed 50 pounds each and required tremendous strength to lift. Boom! 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 And he was being rather insistent. How rude. Shinzo stormed across the great courtyard to the main gates, determined not to let this visitor disturb the master in his meditation. Placing his mop and bucket by the door, Shinzo reached up and slipped a chain off the gate. Ordinarily he'd use the spy hole to see who was there, but he was in a fighting mood. He wanted to confront the person who dared disturb them in their most important work. Hauling on the great oaken door so that it swung open with a ponderous creak, Shinzo stepped into the doorway and declared, "Yes, what is it?" "Hello, friend," came the response, and it was in English. Shinzo squinted against the bright morning sunshine that flowed in around the stranger. He should have remembered the time of day. A warrior is always aware of his surroundings. Being blinded by the sun gives the attacker the advantage. Luckily, the stranger was a man and not a demon. Tall, thin, dark-eyed, and wearing a broad-brimmed black hat, the stranger was definitely a Westerner. Shinzo couldn't tell if he was American, European, or Australian. He wore a heavy overcoat of dark wool, unusual given the pleasant temperatures they were experiencing, but he didn't look dangerous. Taking a moment to gather his thoughts, Shinzo made the mental switch to English. It wasn't a problem. He was fluent in 5 different languages. Not as many as his brothers, but his 5 were the 5 most commonly used languages on the planet. Cooling slightly from his desire to confront someone, Shinzo nodded politely to the stranger. "Yes, hello. How may I help you?" The man grinned, and his perfect white teeth, with the exception of one glowing gold incisor, sparkled. "The real question is, how can I help you?" Shinzo frowned. This was not a proper response. He glanced out the doorway and down the road past the glade of trees that marked the approach to the temple. There was no car. The man had to have walked. "Are you in need of assistance?" The man grinned again. "No, friend, I'm here to assist you. Am I correct in assuming that you are the man of the house?" Shinzo caught the subtle innuendo. "This is a temple. I am a student and very busy. If you do not need assistance, I will say good day." He attempted to close the door, but the man stuck his foot in the doorway. Shinzo had to pull back on the door handle to avoid crushing the man's foot. "That was a very stupid thing to do," he said angrily. "This door weighs 200 pounds. The man nodded. "Of course it does. A fine 300-year-old solid oak door like this would weigh nothing less. But I knew you wouldn't let the door slam shut on me." "What makes you think that?" The man's eyes twinkled. "'Cause you are a man of honor." Shinzo felt complimented by the words, but didn't let his ego get the better of him. "Be that as it may, our conversation is at an end. Good day." The stranger grinned. He did that often. It was as if the world were an amusing plaything, and he found infinite pleasure in making it spin. "Friend," he said, "I can see you are a busy man. A student, you say. Of course you are. And you must get back to your duties. He indicated the bucket and mop by the door. Shinso looked away. Yes, I must be getting back to them. The man nodded in sympathy. Of course, but what would you say if I told you I have just what you need to get your duties done faster and easier than ever before? What would you pay for the answer to all your troubles? Shinso frowned. He was a salesman? The answers to all one's troubles are found in self-contemplation, discipline, and dedication to the greater good. It was one of the temple's teachings. The stranger nodded. Of course they are, but the answer to a cleaner and brighter floor is to be found in this revolutionary mop and cleanser. Like a stage magician, the stranger reached behind him and drew forth a mop. Then, from an inside pocket in his overcoat, he produced a bottle of cleanser. The mop had a 5-foot-long, bright blue plastic handle and was topped with an oversized foam head. The pink bottle cleanser resembled any that you might find in a store. That is what you are selling? Shinso asked with dismay. The wretched things were haunting him. It's the weapon of choice for all domestic chores, the stranger replied confidently. I'm sorry, Shinso began, but you have wasted... Allow me to demonstrate, the man began, dousing the cobblestones in front of the door with his cleanser. Hey, Shinso cried, The stones gleamed. No, they sparkled. The moment the cleanser touched the granite, the weathered rock took on the sheen of fine, polished marble. And then you just buff, the stranger continued. With a flourish, he spun the mop around so that the head touched the floor lightly as it swept the path. Now the flagstones were so shiny that Shinso could see his reflection in them. It was amazing. With a mop and cleanser like this, Shinso could finish the walkways in minutes and not hours. The master would have to be impressed, and that could mean greater responsibility and training. Shinso imagined himself being elevated to the next level as a result of his brilliant mastery of mopping. It would be... Shinso shook himself. What was he thinking? He wasn't about to be elevated to the next level training for his brilliant mastery of mopping. He wasn't about to do anything. He had no money. I'm sorry, Shinso muttered, but we are a poor order. I cannot pay for your goods. The stranger eyed Shinso in a way that made the young man uncomfortable. It was as if he were trying to see into Shinso's very soul. Poor, huh? No money? Shinso nodded. The stranger glanced past him and into the courtyard. Tell me, friend, this is sacred ground, and you do dedicate yourselves to the betterment of the universe, don't you? Shinso nodded again. It was an odd question. You didn't often run into salesmen who asked spiritual questions. Then I'll tell you what, the stranger continued. I'll give you this mop and cleanser in exchange for a single pebble from your rock garden. How does that sound? Like a poor exchange. For you. A single pebble from our garden is not worth such a wondrous mop and cleanser. The stranger peered through the door and took in the sight of the cherry trees. He breathed deep and smelled the air. He took a moment to ponder the beauty of the place. That's where you're wrong, friend. A single pebble from this place is worth a great deal indeed. Shinso wondered if the man was insane. The offer was an incredibly generous one. Even if it didn't elevate him to the next level of training, doing the best job he'd ever done mopping the floors would certainly impress the Grand Master. Shinso turned off the path and picked up a white stone. This is all you want? That's it. Shinso handed the man the pebble. If you will give me your name, I will say prayers for you. Surely that would be worth more than a pebble. The stranger handed Shinso the mop and cleanser. Nope, the pebble will do. Domo arigato. He then clasped his hands in front of him and bowed his head respectfully. Shinso bowed his head as well. You are welcome, but Shinso looked up. The stranger was gone. Glancing outside, Shinso saw that the road was empty. The stranger couldn't have moved that fast, yet he was nowhere to be seen. How odd. But Shinso was now the proud owner of the miracle mop and cleanser. Pushing the door shut with his shoulder, he marveled at his new tools. With these he would do the best job ever mopping the floors, and the Grand Master would be pleased. Yes, Shinso thought to himself, things were looking brighter already. Shinso mopped all 3 paths within a single hour. Even the path that led down to the bright red ornamental friendship gate in the rock garden was no problem. Shinso thought the mop would catch on every loose quartz pebble that made up the path, but instead it glided over the stones as if they were made of polished glass. Shinso suspected that the cleanser had some wax in it in order to make the stones so shiny, or perhaps it was a modern synthetic that made them so smooth and glossy. Whatever the reason, he finished in record time and was able to take a much-deserved break and return to his video game. It was 45 minutes later when Shinso heard the crash. He had just managed to dispatch the Demon Lord and was now working on defeating the Duke of Demons when a sharp cry shattered the late morning stillness. Master? Shinso shoved the game equipment under his bed and ran for the door. Arriving at the front courtyard, Shinso met with a horrible sight. The master of the temple, the ultimate warrior, lay sprawled on his back in a small pool of blood. Shinso rushed to his teacher's side. Master, he cried, What happened? Were you attacked? Master Oichi's eyes fluttered open, and the older man groaned. No, I came out to check on you and I... The master's eyes seemed to focus at a point over Shinso's left shoulder. I became distracted and slipped. You slipped? Guilt gripped Shinso. The stones were slick because he did not dry them, as he should have. He thought letting them air dry would preserve the shine. It was his fault that the master was hurt. Gently turning his master's head, he saw an ugly gash. Shinso took off his tunic, tore off a strip of cloth to make a bandage. Then, using his cotton belt, he tied the bandage over the wound, tucking what remained of the tunic under his master's head to make him more comfortable. Master, he said, I must call for an ambulance. I will be... Master Oichi's hand shot out and grasped Shinso by the wrist. No. Shinso did not try to resist. Even in his weakened state, his master's grip was too strong to break. You need a doctor. No, Master Oichi cried. The brothers, Shinso. You must get the brothers. Shinso frowned. I will contact the brothers after... Ah! Master Oichi had tightened his grip. The trees, Shinso, he muttered desperately. Look at the trees. Shinso looked up, and time seemed to slow down. What he had not noticed upon entering the courtyard was the steady fall of cherry blossoms. Like a blush-colored snowfall, the delicate flowers were cascading to the ground. The trees were nearly naked. He's coming, Master Oichi whispered. Shinso's head snapped around to the friendship gate that stood in the center of the rock garden. It was a subtle bit of optimism that inspired the order to erect the bright red gate with its graceful curves and dramatic tiers rising 20 feet into the sky at the very spot where the passage to the demon dimension would appear. Perhaps someone had hoped that violence need not be the only answer. Not yet, Master Oichi said, realizing Shinso's thoughts. He will appear when the last flower has fallen. Shinso, Master Oichi's voice became more desperate. The gate must not be left unguarded. Someone must be here to... Master Oichi fainted. The blow to his head had finally taken its toll. Shinso broke his master's grip and laid the man's arm gently by his side. He knew what the master was asking. Don't worry, he whispered. I will be here. Shinso lit the temple's lanterns as dusk fell and the shadows in the courtyard grew long. There had been quite a commotion when the ambulance came and took Master Oichi to the hospital, but now the temple lay in an unnatural silence. No birds sang in the trees and no crickets chirped in the grass. The world knew something was coming. Messages were sent via homing pigeon and voicemail to all the brothers requesting that they return to the temple. The homing pigeons were traditional. It was Shinso's idea that they all get cell phones. Those Shinso was able to reach said they would return immediately, but for the moment he was alone. Checking the trees for the 1000th time, Shinso looked to see if all the blossoms had fallen. A few tenaciously held on. He could only hope somebody would arrive before they fell. He was not the person to meet the demon when it appeared. He was not a warrior. In his 3 years with the temple, the only weapon he'd managed to master was a mop. If forced to fight, the only thing he'd be able to do was die, and in doing so, he would make it impossible for the demons to invade. Shinso looked up as a blossom fell at his feet. Lifting his lantern, he spotted 2 more remaining in the skeletal branch of a tree. They were the last 2 blossoms in the garden. As they stared, a breeze stirred the flowers. One suddenly popped off and fell as if it had been thrown to the ground by an unseen hand. Shinso gasped. There was only one left. Shinso clasped his hands in front of him in prayer. Please, 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 if anyone can hear me, please don't let this blossom fall. The breeze shifted direction, and Shinso could see the petals flutter ever so slightly. Then the breeze died, and the air became still. Thank you, Shinso whispered. As he bowed his head in thanks, the final blossom fell. It was as if a hurricane had struck the temple. A wind so strong that it caused them to stumble sideways tore through the garden, picking up every fallen cherry blossom and whipping it away. Shinso tried to scream, but the breath was sucked from his lungs. Turning desperately, he stared at the friendship gate and watched as the wood began to glow with an inner luminescence. The red paint began to blister and bubble like a diseased skin. In the center of the gate, a bright light began to grow, and a sound similar to a train roaring through the Tokyo subway system came crashing down upon him. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the storm ended. Shinso was left gasping. He hadn't known what to expect, but there was no doubt in his mind that the doorway to the demon realm had opened. His first instinct was to run. He was a few yards from the outer gate. He could be halfway down the road before anything had a chance of catching him. A warrior does not fear his opponent, Shinso whispered in a frightened voice. A warrior is true to his cause. A warrior accepts his destiny when it is revealed. Shinso clutched himself. He was shaking so badly he could barely stay upright. Of course, a voice called out to him. One must be a warrior to begin with. And then that voice laughed, and it was the cruelest sound Chinso had ever heard. If ever a laugh could contain all the world's malice and hatred and evil, it was that one. Chinso opened his eyes. He hadn't even realized he'd shut them. Down at the bottom of the hill, at the base of the Friendship Gate, in front of a glowing wall of light stood a figure, at least 10 feet tall. He was as broad as 3 men, with massive arms and legs that resembled tree trunks more than appendages. He held out his hands away from his body in a relaxed yet alert style. Chinso could see razor-sharp talons jutting from the fingertips. The figure was dressed in the armor of a samurai warrior, yet the breastplate and bindings were so large as to seem almost comical. And upon his head he wore a helmet, at least Chinso assumed it was a helmet, of beaten metal and ivory horns. The face mask was blackened so as to be unrecognizable, but the eyes that burned within the mask contained nothing but insane hatred and evil. "I am General Anti-Crachaz," the figure said in a calm and measured voice. "Look upon me in despair." And Chinso did. "Where is the warrior that is to face me?" the monster demanded. "Let him come forth and do battle." The monster then took a fighting stance, and when he stomped down on his right foot, the earth trembled. Chinso felt like he was going to be sick. There was no one to stand against the demon but him. Taking a deep breath, Chinso stepped forward. I... General Crachaz turned to stare at him, and Chinso's throat closed up in fear. A warrior accepts his destiny when it is revealed. Chinso could hear Master Uechi's voice echoing in his head. A warrior does not fear his opponent. A warrior is true to his cause. These were the words that had guided him from the beginning. These were the words he clung to now. Chinso swallowed hard. My name is Chinso, apprentice, and I will face you." The demon general bellowed in anger. "This is an insult! You dare to send an apprentice to face me? Cowards! I will drag you from your hiding places and tear you limb from limb." The demon turned from side to side as if expecting to find someone hiding in the bushes. Chinso took another step forward. "There is no one else. I am alone." The demon stared at him. Chinso could sense the creature's confusion. "They all ran away?" "No," Chinso hurried to explain. "Master Uechi was going to meet you, but there was an accident. Ordinarily, someone else would take his place, but, well, we didn't know you were coming today, so none of the other monks are here. If he'll come back tomorrow, I'm sure—" The monster shook his massive head. "Enough! The rules are clear. 1 champion for my kind and 1 for yours. If you have no champion, you forfeit and we win. End of discussion." Chinso could feel himself becoming very angry. "Wait a minute. That's not fair. I told you, there was an accident. We've been waiting 1,000 years to meet you, and you picked the one day nobody's around. Surely you can wait a few hours. Or maybe there's a non-combative way we can settle this?" "Non-combative?" The monster chuckled. "Why, yes, there is." Chinso suddenly felt hopeful. "You can convince me to concede the match and leave without killing you. Of course, on the other side of that portal are countless legions of my brothers, and they would not be happy to see me return in defeat. They would punish me. No. No champion means no contest, and that means we win." Chinso acted without thinking. "I didn't say we didn't have a champion. I'm here." General Crachaz actually hesitated before he began to laugh. You will face me?" Chinso nodded his head. "Don't be a fool. I will squat you like a bug. Surrender now and I may let you live as my slave." Chinso knew he had as much chance against this creature as a fly, but that did not dissuade him from doing what he knew to be right. A 1 in a million chance of winning is still a chance. To surrender would be to throw away even that slim possibility. "No, I will face you." The demon nodded his head. "Fine, I could use a snack. As the challenge, you have the right to choose the weapon. What shall it be? Bow staff?" The demon produced a staff of crackling lightning. He swung it deftly in his hands and smacked the earth. It made a sound like a thunder strike. "Katanas?" The staff disappeared, and now the monster held a massive sword in each hand. Whirling the 2 blades, he made them spin so fast that he resembled a child's pinwheel. "Or bare hands?" The swords disappeared, and the general began to execute a series of complicated maneuvers with his hands, his razor's talons slicing the air. Chinso's face fell. No wonder the master trained in so many different disciplines. He was searching for the best weapon to use against this thing. Chinso glanced back at the temple. What was his best weapon? Sitting by the main door was his mop and bucket. If the truth be told, that was his best weapon. Could he alter the contest so the demon had to duel him using something not so lethal? "Don't even think about turning this into some memory challenge or game of chance," the demon hissed at him. "This is not a folk tale where the clever little boy outwits the demon by asking him to change into a mouse, or to squeeze himself into a bottle, or to drain an ocean using a teacup.
We are to do combat. Shinso knew he would die if he met this monster in combat. He needed to buy time till one of the other monks arrived. But how long could he last against something that used a lightning bolt as a bow? This was not a video game. He didn't have any karmic shields or thunder punches or a video game. Shinso rolled the thought around in his head. It was sort of like combat, only you fought using avatars and not swords. People did it online all the time. The matches were even called duels. So, in a way, it could be argued that a video game was a form of combat. I choose, Shinso cried out before common sense got the better of him, combat by avatar. The general's fiery eyes squinted. What is an avatar? Shinso took a deep breath. It's an electronic surrogate, a form of astral projection that allows you to duel anyone on the planet. The general thought for a second. That is not real combat. It does not satisfy the rules of the duel. Shinso stuck out his chin. It doesn't? I think it does. It is a very common form of combat. Your ancient weapons are all very quaint, but today's warriors use much more sophisticated tools. That is not real combat, the general bellowed. Shinso's ears hurt from the shouting, but he sensed that he might have gotten something right. The demon was far too quick to dismiss the suggestion, and far too vehement. So what you're saying is that you have no skills in this form of combat. The demon bellowed a roar that shook the very foundations of the temple. Do not play games. I know what psychology is. Good. But do you know how to play a video game? Two players place the avatars in the field of combat. They then control the avatar's actions so that the two fight to the death. The player who wins advances to the next level. It's no different from the duel you're asking me to fight right now. And if the choice is mine, then I choose combat by a video game. Shinso braced himself for the next cry of outrage, but it didn't come. Instead, the general stared at him. I shall make a drinking cup from your skull, he said in a low voice. Prepare the avatars. Shinso couldn't believe his ears. It worked. You'll have to give me a moment. I need to set up in the Great Hall. Wait for me here. Shinso turned to head for the dormitories, but hesitated. You will wait for me, right? The general nodded his head. But I will not wait forever. We must secure our claim to this world before anyone else does. Shinso frowned. Before anyone else does? The general waved a clawed hand at him. Get your video game. Shinso turned and ran. In the great hall stood a cabinet. In that cabinet was a large television set. The monks used it once a day to watch the evening news. For a group devoted to meditation and training, they seemed rather insistent about keeping up on the day's events. Shinso suspected that was how they watched for demon incursions. Odd stories, strange news, silly things that hinted at a deeper threat. Regardless, Shinso thought it would make a better screen than his tiny portable set. When everything was ready, Shinso stepped out into the yard to call forth the general. The demon had already climbed the little hill from the rock garden to the main house. His massive three-toed feet left deep gouges in the white quartz path, and in many places crushed the pebbles into a fine powder. The path and its carefully planned symmetry was ruined. If the general would please take a seat, Shinso began, polite despite the circumstances. I will explain the rules. The general lumbered through the doorway, lowering his head as he did so, and stood in the center of the room. He then kicked the two chairs Shinso had set up for him out of the way. I do not sit. Shinso felt his anger rising. It wasn't necessary for the demon to destroy the furniture. They were not challenging him. Then Shinso looked at the general's legs. His limbs were solid columns of muscles, sinew, and armor, but he had no knees. The general could not bend his legs to sit. That also meant he couldn't be tripped. Like a stilt walker using steel girders for poles, once firmly planted in the ground, there was no release point that would cause him to topple if struck. It was a very specific physical adaptation. Fine. Shinso moved to where his extreme box sat. We'll stand. He picked up a controller pad. This is used to... Yes, the general said as he snatched the controller from Shinso's hand. Press the buttons and make the avatar kick and punch. I understand. Shinso stared at the general. You do? You know about video games? The general chuckled. A true warrior is ever vigilant. We've been watching your kind since before you lived in caves. I know about video games. Let us begin. Shinso gulped hard. Two-player games are different than playing the computer. There isn't much finesse. A player chooses an avatar and tries to use its strengths while protecting against its weaknesses. Shinso chose a fighter who was fast and precise. That came at the cost of strength and endurance. General Crutchaz chose a fighter with limited mobility but a devastating punch. I guess, Shinso thought, people stick to what they know. Shinso wiped the sweat from his hands on his pants and held his controller pad. General Crutchaz stared at the screen. He looked as immobile as a house. Let's do it, Shinso said. Shinso pushed the start button. The avatars appeared on the temple battlefield and squared off. As soon as he could, Shinso began to push buttons. He kicked, he rolled, he instructed his avatar to use Thunder Punch. But the general was no fool. His massive hands were too big to hold a controller, but his razor-sharp talons dug neatly into the hard plastic, so that by twitching a finger the motion was transferred to a button. With surprising gentleness, he manipulated the controls without crushing the controller. Shinsu did well until he made the mistake of allowing his fighter to become stationary for more than 2 seconds. The general had his avatar deliver a blow that sent Shinsu's figure flying. Ha 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 ha! The demon laughed. Even your avatar is weak. 100 life points came off Shinsu's tally. Shinsu pounded the buttons on his controller. Get up, get up! But the avatar was so dazed that he could barely get to his feet. The general found this even funnier than punching him across the screen. Ha! When we conquer this realm, we will use your humans as avatars, and we will enjoy watching you die. Luckily for Shinsu, the general was so fond of gloating that he forgot to continue his attack. When he finally realized his mistake, Shinsu's fighter was revived enough to duck the next blow. Shinsu knew what he had to do. It was time for his patented move.
As soon as he saw an opening, he pressed a combination of buttons that caused his avatar to duck, roll forward, and deliver 2 lightning blows to his opponent's knees. The general's avatar fell to the ground.
What? The general cried. That's not realistic.
It is if you got knees, Shinsu said with glee. He then had his avatar deliver a rapid series of punches to the general's fallen fighter. Life points flew off the general's counter.
I demand the return of those life points, the general cried. My avatar is defective. All's fair in love and war, Shinsu taunted him. The general stared at him. Yes, that's true. He turned his attention back to the game. With surprising skill, the general coaxed his fighter back to his feet while fending off the relentless attacks from Shinsu's avatar. Shinsu had beaten down the general's avatar to 1/3 of its original life points. Despite the difference in hitting power, Shinsu's avatar could now slug it out toe-to-toe with the general's and outlast him. The match was almost guaranteed. That's when the television set exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke. Oops, General Kratchas said with almost a girlish squeak. What did you do? Shinsu demanded. Why, it just popped out of my hands. Shinsu could see the cable from the general's controller sticking out of the shattered picture tube. It was obvious that the general had thrown his controller through the television set in order to end the game before a winner could be declared. That's cheating, Shinsu cried. The general turned his massive head. So it's adhering to the wording, but not the spirit of an ancient agreement. It is time for a true duel. Prepare to die. General Kratchas spun on his right leg so that he turned and planted his left foot a good 6 inches into the floor. It was like watching the foundation for a building being laid. Shinsu ran. Coward! Fool! I would devour you slowly so that you may enjoy every nibbling sensation of my teeth. Shinsu got to the door before he stopped. What was he doing? He'd failed. His delaying tactic had not worked, and now he would suffer a terrible death. But the worst part was, it would only be the first of many the world was going to know. At least die like a warrior, General Kratchas taunted him. Turn and look upon your destruction. Shinsu tried to calm his terrified heart. A warrior does not fear his opponent, he whispered. A warrior is true to his cause. A warrior accepts his destiny when it is revealed. Was this it then? Was he to be the cause of humanity's destruction? If it weren't for that stupid mop and cleanser, if the path hadn't been slippery, the master would not have fallen. If the master had not fallen, he would be here now to save the world. Shinsu turned. The mop, the bucket, the bottle cleanser were sitting just outside the door, taunting him. Choose your death, General Kratchas cried. What? Choose the weapon that I will use to end this game. Shinsu's mind reeled. He still got to choose a weapon? What difference did it make? He was dead no matter what he did. I choose, Shinsu said as he attempted to wrap his mind around the idea that this was the end of the world. Mop and cleanser. He must have been shocked, because he reached out and snatched up the items. Like some sort of movie star, he held them in a parody of what would have been a proper defensive posture. The bottle of wax in his left hand as if to block a blow, the mop in his right hand like some bizarre sword. You dare make jokes? General Kratchas howled. Shinsu's bravado evaporated, and he began to retreat. Perhaps he could use the cleanser to blind the general. Maybe he could jam the mop in the general's mouth and choke him. The general stormed forward. Shinsu ran. He did not dare turn, but watched the general burst through the doorway and into the night air. As Shinsu backpedaled, his foot came upon the start of the white quartz path, and he momentarily lost his balance on the slope. Shinsu's hand came up, and he managed to spill cleanser all over himself. Great, he grumbled. Now I'm going to die smelling of floor cleaner. It was as if the universe wanted to make this moment even worse. Could he at least be allowed to die with some? And suddenly it all became clear. Shinsu looked around him and then over his shoulder to make sure his idea was possible. It wasn't a great idea, but it was something. Looking back at the general, Shinsu raised himself to his full height and sneered, You cheated! You are not a true warrior! For a brief second, the general actually seemed to be taken aback by Chinso's words.
"I have seen many go insane at the moment of their deaths," General Crutches answered. "It does not surprise me that you'd be one of them."
Chinso ignored the insult as he took several steps backwards and down the path. He began spraying the cleanser before him and chanting. "In memory of all those who have come before us," Chinso took several more steps, "and in recognition of all those who will follow in our footsteps." He sprayed more cleanser. It was the rededication ceremony that he and the master were going to perform. It should have been pure mountain water if he were doing it correctly. "Prayers," General Crutches snorted. "Good. You should pray." He then took several jerky steps toward Chinso. General Crutches had been bred for a single purpose, to command an army. He was designed like a fortress, huge, powerful, and immovable. He was meant to rise above the chaos and be seen to be a source of terror for his enemies and inspiration for his troops. He was not, however, designed for the chase. "I honor the four winds," Chinso said as he frantically sprayed cleanser in every direction, "and the sun and the moon." He shot cleanser up into the air and stepped back when it fell to the earth. "And the vows of honor and friendship that we have taken." He turned and shot whatever remained of the cleanser towards the friendship gate and the glowing portal to the demon dimension. He then threw the bottle away. Turning, Chinso clutched the mop in both hands and stared deep into the recesses of General Crutches' mask.
"Let us end this, monster, once and for all."
General Crutches needed no encouragement. With a war cry that would have stopped the hearts of most men, he lunged onto the path and down the hill. His stiff-legged gait made him look silly, but Chinso was in no mood to laugh. He was watching to see if his plan would work. "I will crush you into jelly. I will—" That's when the general's right leg slipped.
"What?"
His left leg was firmly planted on the path, but he had not sunk it into the earth as he had in the main hall. So, as he shifted his weight back on it, his left foot began to slip on the newly waxed stone pebbles. There was a sound like gravel being churned under the wheels of a speeding car. But Chinso knew that a well-trained warrior could compensate for a loss of balance. A well-trained warrior might throw himself off the path rather than fall. Chinso had to make sure General Crutches stayed on the path. Chinso raised his mop and charged. "Hi-ya!" Chinso barely got more than a few yards. His own bare feet slipped badly on the stones, and it was all he could do to stay upright as he splashed around in large puddles of sloppy cleanser.
But General Crutches was a trained warrior. In the face of an attack, even such an improbable attack as Chinso and his mop, the general moved to defend himself by planting both feet firmly on the ground. Only there was nothing firm for him to stand on. Both feet scrabbled for traction before flying out from beneath him. He landed with a horrible clatter upon the stones. Chinso couldn't believe it. He toppled the general. The demon, infuriated by his situation, began to thrash about, tearing up large sections of the path and ground. Much to Chinso's relief, this motion had the exact result he'd hoped for. The general, clad from head to foot in metal plates and now dripping with cleanser, began to slide downhill towards the portal. It was slow at first, just an imperceptible shifting weight, but then the armor began to act like the metal runners on a sled, and the massive form of the general began to move. The general realized what was happening. His arms shot out, and he dug his claws into the ground, but razor-sharp talons do not make good digging tools. All the general managed to do was make a deep series of shallow furrows in the deep layer of stones that made up the path. Chinso knew he had to keep the general off balance and struggled to get up the hill. The monster heard his approach and tried to get up, but his struggles only increased the speed at which he was moving. "This is not a proper duel," he bellowed. "This is not a proper weapon." Chinso closed with his opponent. "Like hell it isn't. I am Chinso, master of the mop." Chinso swung his mop over his head and hit the general square in the face with the bright orange head. He then scrambled back and out of reach. That was it. The general screamed with rage and lunged at Chinso. The motion was so powerful that it sent him speeding down the side of the hill. Chinso had been expecting it. He'd known from the start that he was on the wrong side of the hill should the general fall. Chinso now faced the very real possibility that he would either be crushed beneath the massive creature barreling towards him, or that he'd get caught up in the thrashing limbs and be swept into the demon dimension as well. Chinso didn't relish either possibility, but Chinso knew a few things he could do with a mop other than clean floors. Planting the mop head firmly on the ground, Chinso pole vaulted over the oncoming form of General Crutches. The general lashed out with one massive hand and snatched the mop handle as Chinso passed over him, but the cheap plastic tube shattered in his powerful grip, sending Chinso flying. Chinso landed with a painful crunch in the grass and felt something in his shoulder pop, but he managed to roll over in time to watch General Crutches bounce all the way down the hill and into the portal. There was a bright flash of light and a long, hollow scream as the general collided with the glowing disc, and then the entire thing winked out of existence. Chinso blinked his eyes several times. The garden was silent. He'd done it. He'd won.
Cradling his arm, he tried to get up, but found his legs were shaking so badly he couldn't stand. He fell to his knees, facing the Friendship Gate. Somewhere in the distance, Shinsu could hear the front gates of the temple bursting open. Voices began calling his name. The monks had arrived. Over here, he cried out weakly as the world began to spin. He'd won. And for the first time in his life, Shinsu realized that he was a warrior. He just had to become one in his own way.
You've just been listening to The Way of the Warrior by Arthur Sanchez. To learn more about the author or his work, please visit www.arthursanchez.com.